Many believe the road to the White House runs through Ohio. Why do they feel that way? And why in particular for Republicans? While it was the birthplace of 8 presidents, there are other factors that made the state pivotal to GOP fortunes, both today and in the past.
It's an incredible story if you look at American history from 1816, the election of Lincoln, to 1924. Just take those years. You're looking at, I believe, 13 presidents, 10 of whom are Republican, 7 of whom are from Ohio, and 5 of whom have Civil War service records.
Civil War service by Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Harrison, and McKinley echo the party's tie to patriotism and the Union. But the driving force behind the ascendancy of the party was the growing population and industrial power of Ohio. Its electoral votes and economic clout in the Gilded Age were factors of immense consequence in American presidential politics.
So there's this link to Ohio, and what happens during the Civil War is quite interesting. Business booms during the war. Unlike the South, the North is not invaded, and nascent industrial enterprises in Cleveland are kind of sparked up a bit. And so there's money being made. And many of these people will be Republicans and backers, so they're becoming wealthier. And then after the Civil War, that Cleveland in particular, but other cities around the lake, really become part of the American industrial expansion. Just to remark, one of the largest expansions in the world up to that time. And so there are fortunes being made here. And those fortunes are very often then reinvested in the Republican Party.
The reason that Ohio is so important in the presidency is that if you look at our nation, you have the founding fathers. They're mainly Virginians. Then I have what I've coined as the saving fathers, the presidents who saved this country after the Civil War. And that's not easy. You really needed to have Ulysses S. Grant in the presidency after the Civil War. He holds this country together. And then you have to have Hayes, who ends Reconstruction and begins that process of binding back up together. And then you have McKinley, who takes us to world power. Then Harding, who is a person I know a lot about, ends up really stabilizing the world after the First World War. The world was on its knees. We were the only solvent country, so to speak, at that time. Harding comes in, he establishes the budget for the first time, what we now know as the OMB. He has an international disarmament treaty, the very first international disarmament treaty. They took battleships out and sunk some of them. And he goes into the South, gives a speech to people in Birmingham, Alabama, first president to go into the South after the Civil War, and says to a group, they're blacks on one side, whites on another, segregated by a chain link fence. He says, I want to say something to you people, the white people, that you don't want to hear. Democracy is a lie if the Negro does not have political equality. Very courageous speech for him to do, and he repeated it in Atlanta a couple days later. Booed, roundly booed by the people who were there. The African Americans cheered. What we have out of the Ohio presidents is this stitching the country back together, taking it to world power, stabilizing it, and establishing some very important values for the country. Racial equality, protection of free speech. There are a lot of great values. Women's first vote is the 1920 campaign. That campaign is 2 Ohioans running against each other. James Cox, who was then the governor, the Democrat, against Warren Harding. I think that Ohio really matters. It continues to matter today, and every 4 years everybody looks to Ohio. We have a lot of money spent here on advertising. We get tired of it. But it's really important because I think it's the center of the nation in a lot of ways.